This is the story of how an empire built on borrowed power collapses not with a screaming match, but with absolute terrifying silence. In the immediate aftermath of Easter Sunday, 2026, Queen Camilla walked back into the private corridors of Windsor Castle and realized that a bloodless coup had just taken place right in front of the world's cameras. She had not been yelled at, she had not been publicly insulted, she had not been physically stopped from entering a room. Instead, she had been subjected to the ultimate institutional erasure. This video will unpack the secret power grab Camilla attempted during the monarchy's darkest hour, how Prince William and Prince Edward uncovered the administrative paper trail, and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. By the end of this, you will understand the devastating realization that just snapped shut around Camilla. She finally understands that she actually owns nothing, and the men who control the future of the crown have quietly locked the doors. To understand the sheer magnitude of Camilla's current humiliation, we have to rebuild the illusion of absolute power she constructed over the last 30 years. For decades, she played a masterful, agonizing game of chess. She survived the ghost of Princess Diana. She outlasted the public hatred. She slowly pushed to elevate her own non-royal children, blurring the lines of the institution to accommodate her bloodline. And by early 2023, she believed she had King Charles completely controlled, and by extension, the entire British monarchy. She felt so untouchable that she began leaving psychological clues of her dominance right out in the open. The ultimate visual proof of this staggering arrogance happened in February 2023. During a routine visit to East London, Camilla stepped out of a car wearing a piece of jewellery that made senior palisades freeze in their tracks. Pinned near her heart was a brooch crafted in the exact shape of the Tudor crown. It was a silver frame packed with sapphires, rubies, and emeralds. In the language of palace protocol, jewellery is never just an accessory. It is a forensic indicator of hierarchy. The Tudor crown is the central symbol on King Charles's official royal cipher. It is the literal emblem of his sovereign authority. By fastening it to her chest, Camilla was sending a message so deafeningly loud, it required no press release. She was declaring that she did not just stand beside the monarch she carried his power. She was signaling permanence, but she did not stop there. The true moment of moral outrage. The moment that turned exactly the wrong people against her at exactly the wrong time arrived 3 months later at the coronation. Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey wearing a crown reset with the Cullinan 3, 4, and 5 diamonds. The world knew these stones intimately as Granny's chips. They were Queen Elizabeth's most treasured personal belongings, worn on her body for 70 years. The nation's grief over Elizabeth was still entirely raw, yet the public was forced to watch a woman they had spent decades despising reach directly into a dead queen's jewelry box to crown herself. This was not a tribute to history, it was staggering exploitation. She was putting on the armor of a woman who represented the dignified, uncomplaining sacrifice that Camilla herself had systematically undermined. That was the peak of the illusion. Camilla believed that because she possessed the king's jewels and the king's favor, she possessed the institution. But the institution has an immune system and it was about to activate. The trigger for her downfall was a breathtaking miscalculation regarding the people who actually keep the monarchy running. In early 2024, when both King Charles and Princess Catherine were sidelined by severe cancer diagnoses, the entire weight of the British monarchy fell onto a few select shoulders. Prince Edward and his wife Sophie stepped forward instantly. They took on grueling solo international tours, showing up for a fragile institution with zero safety net and complete dignity. Then came the April 2024 honours list. This was the moment King Charles was supposed to formally recognise those who had held the line. Queen Camilla was heavily rewarded. Her inner circle. The fiercely protective group of aides known inside the palace walls as the Rottweilers were protected and elevated. But Prince Edward and Sophie were entirely omitted. Not a single mention. It was an empty payroll sheet masking a deep institutional insult. Camilla's team had historically controlled access to the press, feeding ugly narratives to bury their rivals. And Sophie had spent years feeling the brutal weight of that machine. Edward watched his wife do the work, carry the burden, and get treated like an outsider in her own family so that Camilla's operatives could thrive. When that honours list was published, Edward did not leak a story to the tabloids. He did not demand a meeting with the king. He responded with total suffocating silence. And in the high-stakes warfare of the British royal family, silence is not submission, it is preparation. Edward quietly redirected his absolute loyalty away from the broader institution and handed it exclusively to one man, Prince William, Edward is a man capable of chilling emotional detachment when the crown requires it. When his own brother, Prince Andrew, was facing the total collapse of his reputation, it was not Charles who delivered the final blow. Charles was a mile away at Sandringham. It was Edward who walked into Wood Farm, looked Andrew in the eye and told him his time was over. Edward dismantled his own brother for the survival of the monarchy and walked out without flinching. That is the executioner Camilla accidentally created as an enemy. The trap finally snapped shut on Easter Sunday 2026. This is where the paper trail of Camilla's demise became a visual verdict. As the royal family walked into St. George's Chapel, the entire formation was deliberately engineered. At an event of this magnitude, every single footstep is dictated by protocol. Someone decides who stands where. And someone decided that Prince William and Princess Catherine would walk forward, their children flanking them like an unbreakable wall. Directly beside William stood Prince Edward and Princess Anne. They had pulled tightly into a fortress of bloodline royalty. But the forensic proof of the shifting power dynamic was who was missing. Camilla's entire ecosystem had been surgically removed from the frame. Prince Andrew, whom Camilla had never publicly fully severed ties with, was gone. The extended family members who orbited Camilla's side of the royal picture were nowhere to be found. The photograph captured that day was not a family portrait, it was a perfectly executed administrative eviction. Edward and William had used the very system Camilla thought she controlled to isolate her completely. Behind closed doors, the terrifying reality is now washing over the Queen Consort. Prince Edward has initiated the block, mapping out the architecture of Prince William's future court. Camilla suddenly realizes that her entire operation is rotting from the inside. When the reign inevitably shifts, she has no automatic rights. She has no structural authority. Every diamond she wore, every title she wielded, and every door she walked through was leased on the fragile ticking clock of her husband's mortality. The fortress has closed its gates. She is standing on the wrong side of the wall. And she's about to discover just how cold the outside can be. When the reality of that meticulously orchestrated Easter photograph finally set in, the immediate instinct of a woman who had spent 30 years manipulating power dynamics was to appeal to the highest authority. For decades, whenever Camilla faced an obstacle, a public relations crisis, or a rival within the palace walls, King Charles was her ultimate shield. He was the man who had waged a relentless decades-long campaign to force the British establishment to accept her. He had rewritten protocol, defied the public, and demanded that she be crowned by his side. So as the walls began to close in, and as Prince Edward and Prince William quietly aligned to freeze her out of the institution's future, Camilla turned to her husband to intervene. She needed Charles to reprimand his son. She needed him to put Edward back in his place. She needed the king to remind the royal court that she was untouchable. But what happened next was the psychological climax of Camilla's entire royal existence, and it was utterly devastating. When she presented the subtle slights, the orchestrated omissions, and the terrifying reality of her shrinking circle, King Charles did nothing. He offered no public defense. He issued no internal memos reprimanding his brother or his heir. The silence from the monarch was deafening, and in that silence, Camilla discovered the coldest truth of the British monarchy. Charles is a man facing his own mortality, and a king facing the end of his reign will always, ultimately choose the survival of the crown over the comfort of his spouse. Charles knows exactly how strong William has become. He sees that William and Edward are successfully carrying the operational weight of the monarchy. To fight his own heir now, to tear the family apart, to soothe Camilla's ego, would destroy the very institution Charles waited 70 years to inherit. For the first time in their history, Charles chose the crown over Camilla, leaving her completely defenseless against the men who are designing the future. To understand why this silent betrayal leaves Camilla so utterly exposed, we have to look past the velvet ropes and the royal titles and examine the raw, commercial reality of her situation. Camilla has spent years projecting the illusion of absolute sovereign wealth. She moves between palaces, she is surrounded by fleets of security, and she wears priceless historical diamonds. But this is the staggering truth of her commercial desperation. Camilla actually owns almost nothing. The glittering empire she surveys is entirely the property of the state, the monarch, or the Duchy of Cornwall. When King Charles eventually passes, the financial architecture of the monarchy dictates that William inherits everything that matters. William already controls the Duchy of Cornwall, a billion-dollar real estate and investment portfolio that funds the public, charitable and private activities of the heir to the throne. Upon becoming King, William will instantly inherit the Duchy of Lancaster and take control of the sovereign grant. he will become the sole landlord of the royal palaces. Camilla, a woman who currently lives like an empress, will technically become a tenant relying entirely on the grace and favour of a stepson who has spent his life silently enduring her presence. She holds no permanent lease on her royal lifestyle. Her power, her access, and her funding were a subscription paid for by Charles. And that subscription is fatally tied to his fading heartbeat. This financial and administrative reality is the ultimate weapon William and his allies are preparing to use. There will be no screaming matches or dramatic banishments. The revenge will be executed through the flawless, weaponized application of administrative protocol. When William ascends the throne, Camilla will be instantly reclassified as Queen Dowager. It is a title that sounds respectful but is structurally hollow. It carries no constitutional authority, no automatic right to a prominent public role, and most devastatingly, no guaranteed place in the new king's inner circle. The first and most visible phase of this new order will take place inside the royal vaults. The jewellery Camilla so brazenly weaponized will be quietly but firmly recalled. Remember the Cullinan diamonds? Queen Elizabeth's treasured granny's chips that Camilla had reset into her own crown. Remember the Tudor crown brooch she pinned to her chest as a declaration of permanence. When William plans his coronation, his people will open those vaults, take those pieces back and hand them directly to Catherine, the woman who spent years being targeted by Camilla's media operatives. The woman who endured the vicious gossip of the Rottweilers with uncomplaining grace will inherit the ultimate physical symbols of the monarchy. Camilla will be forced to watch as the jewels she borrowed are fastened to the woman who actually represents the future. The visual humiliation will not end with the jewelry. It will seep into every corner of royal life, delivered in quiet, devastating blows that only insiders and careful observers will fully comprehend. Portraits of Camilla that currently hang in prominent staterooms will be carefully taken down supposedly for conservation or rotation, and quietly moved into long-term storage, replaced by striking new commissions of Catherine and William. When attending minor ceremonial events, Camilla will discover that her precedence has vanished without the king by her side. The strict rules of royal protocol dictate that she must curtsy to blood princesses. She'll find herself being politely escorted through side doors and seated several rows back, visually subordinated to Princess Anne, a woman who has spent decades fiercely protecting the crown from the exact kind of exploitation Camilla represents. This is the brilliant, ruthless strategy that Prince Edward and Prince William have engineered. They looked at a woman who had spent 3 decades fighting a war for public approval and royal dominance, and they realized they did not need to fight her at all. They simply needed to wait her out and use the absolute rules of the institution to dismantle her. Edward sacrificed his own public glory, absorbing the insult of being left off the honours list, because he knew that true power is not a medal pinned to a chest. True power is standing on the right side of history when the era inevitably shifts. The ghost of Princess Diana is not being avenged by a scandalous tell-all book or a noisy media campaign. It is being avenged by a flawless administrative purge. William has taken the trauma of his mother's erasure, combined it with the cold institutional discipline of his grandmother, and forged it into a weapon of total control. Camilla played a 30-year game of chess to capture the king, but she forgot that in the British monarchy, the king is not the board. The institution is the board, and William now owns the board. The trap has snapped shut. The keys have been quietly confiscated, and the illusion of absolute power has finally shattered. If you want to understand the hidden power dynamics and the silent wars shaping the future of the British monarchy, make sure you subscribe and leave a comment below on how you think the palace will handle this unprecedented transition.